Hi, I'm Elizabeth, or Sabrielle, pick one. And this panel is about the Free State Project, where we came from. We have a lot of very early porcupines. The early porks get the glory or something like that. At least that's how it is today for the next hour. So we are going to start out at that end and work our way down. We have, if you could raise your hand, we have Brad, Varen, Dave, Dawn, Sandy, and Seth. And they're going to start out by introducing themselves, telling us the year that they arrived, and if they came with anybody else or if they made the move alone. And then I'm going to ask some more questions, and at the end, of course, there will be Q&A for everybody attending.
So my name's Brad Keys. My wife Margot and I came out in 2004 for the first Porcfest. We had been part of the project since before the vote, voted for New Hampshire, came here to see what it was about. We were on the 5 to 6 year plan, we figured, but after the first Porcfest on the way home, we literally decided to go home, put our house on the market, and 9 months later we were here in 2005. We moved with our 4 girls who are now here running around. Well, actually, one's right there.
In the largest truck in the world.
Yeah, huge truck, great stories. At the time we moved, we were in the first 100 movers. We literally had a party with everybody in the Free State Project in New Hampshire at our house. When we moved in, we came with a 26-foot box truck, which got unloaded in 45 minutes because we had about 25 people show up to help us move, which was a great start. Never regretted moving. We've been here 9 of the 10 Porcfests we've made it to. Known all the people on the panel since the beginning and lots of other people here, but what's amazing is how many people we don't know now. The number of new people is fantastic, and for anyone who's new and hasn't moved, please do, quickly.
My name is Varen Swearingen, and I may be the only person at Porcfest, my wife and I, Edie, who have signed up legitimately for the Free State Project twice. We did not vote for New Hampshire. In fact, we had opted out of New Hampshire, so we got kicked out of the project and had to sign back up again. We came on a tour in 2003 right after the state vote and decided after we went home, we talked it over, decided to move. I came by myself to Porcfest 2004. I'm one of the, I think, 16 or 17 people now that have been to all 10 of them. And we moved in October of 2004. I think we were in the 60s or so. And we had a moving in party. A lot of us did back then. Everybody fit in the house. There was about 60 people there, and we didn't know that there were that many libertarians in the whole world. So that was pretty exciting. And with us at the time were our 2 children, Edison and Aaron. We've since had 2 more, Elliot and Violet. They're 2 and 1 now, or about to be. And after the Porcfest 04 experience, I got interested in doing things. I like to do things. And so I wound up roped into organizing Porcfest 2005, and then wound up in various leadership positions in the FSP organization, president a couple of times, and still on the board. Haven't done any of the local politics stuff, but have spent most of my time working on trying to grow the FSP itself and bring, of course, more of you here. So that's been my primary form of activism. I fly airplanes for a living and play music, and what else is important? I should probably shut up. And it's Dave's turn.
I'll get to those other things. Don't worry.
Wow. To be honest with you, I have so many fond memories and just really incredible times. Met incredible group of people. I really don't know where to begin, to be honest with you. But anyway, I'll save them for around the campfire tonight and beer. Okay, now I'm going to go into the other part. I'm Dave Minson, and I'll be here 10 years, February 2nd, okay? It's been an incredible ride. I did want to share something with you because I think sometimes we lose a perspective of like where we were and where we are as an organization. So I want to kind of share something with you, like in my experience, how I ended up here, okay? Go online, I see this FSP, I check it out, the people seem like they're pretty credible, the leaders. I signed up. Okay, I got into a thing where I'm thinking I need to see some of these people. I don't want to just like something on a computer. And 10 years ago, it was all just forums and stuff, email. But anyway, so this was even before New Hampshire was picked as a state. Okay, so this energetic group of individuals from New Hampshire that were free staters, they decided, because we didn't know what state was going to be picked, they decided to have this little event at Rogers and called the Escape to New Hampshire and invited us up. Okay, and I figured, well, I'm a people person. I want to see some people. And they were mostly libertarian folks here. I can remember getting here, and I pull in, I'm tired, I'm dirty, and I'm ready to punch someone, There's these people, this little red house up here. Okay, there's maybe 20, 25 of them. They're just sitting out there in lawn chairs with big grins on their faces, and these signs that said, like, welcome free staters. Man, and it was like an oasis. So to make a long story short, how I got here, okay, is I, within a half hour, had fallen in love with these people. And the thing that impressed me the most is how normal they were. 7 months later, I was living here. Okay, and just, like I said, we'll do lots of good stories around the campfire, later. I don't want to call up all the time. Did want to just say one last thing, though. When we were doing the campaign to get New Hampshire picked as the state, okay, this was our most incredible selling point. And here, you want to take a look at it, pass it around? It's called the Escape, or the 101 Reasons to Move to New Hampshire. And I did just want to make special note to, see that girl there that's all red, sort of, and has a red thing? Michelle Dumas, she was like one of the people, well, she did that, but she was also one of the people that put the Escape to New Hampshire together. I mean, oh yeah, I did the first Porcfest too. That's something we'll talk about later. But, yeah, I'm done now.
Okay, he's done now.
I'm sorry.
Okay, I'm Dawn Lincoln, and I moved in June of '04 with my two daughters, who are now young ladies, young adults. And I met and married a native after I moved here, Bill Campbell. There you go. So I don't know. It's been great. I love it. I've lived in two towns in Southwest New Hampshire, and I am a 10 of 10 Porcfest person, and I love Porcfest. It's a lot of fun, and it's great meeting all these new people, and just waiting for y'all to get your fannies up here and help us support liberty in New Hampshire.
I'm Sandy Pierre, and I have to apologize in advance. I'm getting over bronchitis, so if I bust out coughing, that's why. I joined the FSP in the spring of 2002. I think there were only about 200 participants at that point. And I signed up as what's called a glass eater, meaning at that point, New Hampshire had not been selected as the state. There were 10 states under consideration. I said, I'll go with whichever of the 10 wins the vote. And so New Hampshire won the vote. New Hampshire was not my first choice. It wasn't even in my top 5, actually. So I was a little pouty after it won. But so the results of the election were announced on October 1st. The next month, on Thanksgiving weekend, I'm from California, by the way. I flew out to New Hampshire for the first time to check it out. And so I was still going to stick to my commitment, even though my first choice, or second or third or fourth or fifth or sixth, hadn't won. And so I actually moved in spring of 2005. I'm from Oakland, California. I moved by myself. I just loaded up my Subaru with as much as would fit and drove solo across country. And I started out living in Manchester because I wanted to minimize the culture shock going from Oakland, California to New Hampshire. But I love Manchester. So then I moved down to Nashua. I got a job in Nashua. And then 4 years ago, I sufficiently acclimated to New Hampshire. Actually, I've really acclimated. Like now, cities stress me out. So I bought a house in a very small town out in the woods. So now I live in a log cabin in the woods. And I think that's answered all the original questions. So thank you.
So, I'm Seth Cohn, and In 2003, I was living in Oregon at the time. I had grown up in New York, and I was really not happy in Oregon. I had been dealing with the politics and economics there, and in 2003, we were still seeing a lot of the fallout from 9/11. I remember going and visiting New York, and there were military in the streets with guns, and I'm like, this is not the country I grew up in. And so I actually started saying, maybe it's time to get out of this country. And I was engaged to a woman who had lived her entire life on the West Coast. And, here's her fiance talking about, hey, we should leave the country. And she said, I have a dozen nieces and nephews, and I really like seeing them. Isn't there any place in the U.S. we can go? And so basically what happened was in October of 2003 when the vote was announced, and I heard the Free State Project before but hadn't signed up, and it seemed like another one of those crazy libertarian pipe dreams. And the vote had happened, and they had decided on New Hampshire. And I basically checked the site out, and there was this awesome document called 101 Reasons to Move to New Hampshire. And I read this, and I'd grown up in New York, and I'm like, New Hampshire sounds awesome. How come I never went there? How come I ended up going to Idaho and Oregon and all these places when, in my own backyard, there was this great state. So, I went ahead and said to the fiance, I said, hey, let's go check this out. And she's like, but it snows there. And so we said, well, let's check it out. And so we flew out in January of '04. In part because she wanted to see what the weather was going to be like. And so this essay, hopefully it's still on the website. The website's being changed, but our original trip is documented there, so I'm not going to go into all the details. But one of the things that was interesting is that it snowed in Oregon while we were here. And it snowed here, and she watched as the streets got cleared and life went on. And she's like, well, this was pretty good. In the meantime, we're reading about how Oregon had 2 inches of snow and completely shut down. So that was January of '04. We met some awesome people. Almost nobody had moved. There were a few, but a lot of the people were locals. And everybody we met was really cool. And I had some political questions answered, and she met people that answered the important questions like, what happens when it snows? What do you do? And the answer is, you go out and you have fun in the snow. You can put a sweater on and you can go do all these cool activities. You don't have to go ahead and be shut in for months out of the year. So in January, we came out and visited. We didn't end up making Porcfest in 2004. We did move in October of 2004, so I've been here ever since. We got married and basically moved right after that. And then unfortunately, we fell subject to what I call the Free State Divorce Project.
Don't talk about that here.
Well, this is history. This is important. I don't know if intense activism causes divorce, but there are a bunch of us that have had marriages break up. There are also people that have formed new marriages, and there are absolutely wonderfully stable marriages. So don't get me wrong. If you move here, it does not mean you're going to get divorced. But honestly, it's a factor. When you move, it's a stressful situation, and you add on, and I'm going to be a full-time activist and make a change for liberty, and your spouse is going, oh, really? That's a stress. It's a stress like any other. If you get arrested, right? I'm pointing to a particular couple here. What happens when one of you is in jail and the other one's like, yeah, okay, I've got to go visit them during visiting hours.
I'm going to put this another way. The Free State Project is a great test for you and your loved ones, and it's a great way to learn more about each other and grow stronger together. And no matter how your relationships evolve, there is always a lot of love waiting for you here.
And that's all true. Yes, that's all true.
Yeah, here you go. Okay, so first of all, talk about what?
Just quick counter to that.
Yes, I was going to say.
Varen and I and our respective wives both just celebrated our 20th anniversaries. So there is the other side too.
And I got engaged since I've been here. So, and we're getting married in a year. So, okay. All right, so the next question I have is if you could tell us about the kind of hats that you've worn since you arrived, your civilian hats and your activist hats.
Sure. We'll go civilian first. We lucked out as far as where we moved. We moved into a house that we liked, but the neighborhood looked good, but we knew nothing about our actual neighbors. Turns out we get along very, very well with our neighbors. Our immediate neighbors now homeschool their kids along with ours. My wife does a co-op with them every Monday. There's a whole huge community of homeschoolers around, which is great. We have neighborhood parties that have 20, 30 kids and all their parents over. Farmer up the street who raises cows and pigs and whole milk and everything else, and it's turned out great for us just from a day-to-day living standpoint. And I've heard the same stories from lots of other people. There are a lot of good people in New Hampshire, and they're easy to get along with if you reach out and meet them. As far as activism goes, I took one of the recommendations of Don Gorman, who is a state rep who's been here forever, saying get involved locally. And I remember probably the first Porcfest, he said, you can get in positions in your local town by doing almost nothing. And I actually did that. The first year we were here, Budget Committee is the group that oversees the local town budgets. And more often than not, people don't run. So there are blank lines on the ballots. And if you get 2 or 3 neighbors to write your name in, more than likely you'll be on the budget committee. So I was on the budget committee for 6 years. It was a great experience because I learned a lot about how the town operates, how all the towns operate, how the state funds towns. I met a lot of people in the town. So if you want something small and to get to know your local people when you move in, anything on budget committee or local town zoning boards or whatever is a great way to find out what's going on. Other activism for me hasn't been so much other than bringing my wife here, who is now an NRA pistol instructor and has been involved with helping State Project and is part of Second Amendment Sisters, which is a women teaching women about shooting group, and other things that I've totally forgotten about, and homeschooling. So it's bits and pieces here and there, kind of mixed in with our day-to-day life.
We don't have enough fingers to count the hats that I've worn. I'll try to categorize them to keep this semi-organized. I'll go with, let's see, job, family, music, church, FSP/political activism. I work as an airline pilot for a living, which was convenient with respect to the move because I didn't have to change jobs. I'm actually in the middle of a job change now. And the nice thing is I can stay put right here in New Hampshire during all of that. I fly, for those of you who don't know, for the last 10, 13 years, I guess, I've been flying the MD-11, DC-10, and 747 at various times in various positions, pretty much all around the world. So I don't work here locally. And that's been my career for all of my adult life. I also serve on the advisory board for the FBO in Keene. And let's see, job.
Could you specify what that is?
For a fixed-based operator, the people that sell the fuel and do flight instruction and all of that at the Keene Airport. They decided they liked me, I guess. So let's see, family. We've got family, right? Edie and I, as Brad mentioned, we've been married 20 years now. We have 4 kids. We homeschool them. She does the heavy lifting on the homeschooling, but I teach various topics from time to time when I'm home. And that's pretty much a full-time job to try to keep all of that going. So she does not have a job outside the home. Music is a segue to the next. We're both musicians, and I don't do a lot of playing in New Hampshire. I do play regularly at the church that we go to, and I try to crash jam sessions kind of all over the world wherever I go. I play jazz, drums, and Edie's also a singer. To tie that together, we both work in the music department at the church we go to, which is in southwestern New Hampshire. It's an evangelical free church, and there was a session yesterday on religion and liberty, which was kind of interesting because some comments about, gosh, the people in my church think I'm crazy as a libertarian. And I was quite shocked to discover that many of the people in my church already were libertarians, so that was kind of fun. And then, of course, with respect to the FSP/political activism, I've had probably every title, maybe in the whole organization. I really don't know. Porkfest 2005 organizer, vice president of operations, president, nothing, president, board member for a lot of that time. So as far as FSP historians, I may be, Steve Cobb's not here, Jason Sorens isn't here, so I might be the resident senior historian in the bunch, but at least for the organization. And I've not done a lot of political activism. I did run for state rep in 2008, primarily because the Republican Party in Keene is not quite so strong. For those of you who know the local politics, the Democrats in Keene kind of rule the day. And they wanted a full slate, and I said, well, I could run. And they said, oh, yeah, we'd love for you to run, which I thought was also interesting. So I put my name on the ballot. I told them I couldn't really campaign a lot, but I did some. And I made some friends that way, both in the party and some of the other candidates that I ran against. And some of them maybe a little less friendly these days, but so it goes. And let's see, what else have I done activism-wise? I do recall, I'll let Dawn tell the story, but I do recall an early piece of NHLA history regarding the Bill Review Committee that I didn't have a lot to do with, Dawn had more to do with, but I'll let her tell that story. I happen to be a fly on the wall for the conversation there.
Give me a bigger reminder of what it was.
You, me, Bob Gaida, and I don't remember who the fourth was. And you were the brilliant one that asked the question, what could we do to help you? And so you can finish. Do you know the rest of the story?
Let me give the audience a little bit of background. The NHLA that Varen refers to is the New Hampshire Liberty. New
Hampshire Liberty Alliance.
Alliance. I always want to say association, but it's alliance. And they do this brilliant thing every week that the legislature is in session called the Gold Standard. And they look at all of the bills that are up for a vote, and they say, well, if you love liberty, how should you as a state rep vote on this? And how important is it? Who will it impact? And so that's what Varen refers to when he talks about NHLA bill review.
Dawn might not take credit for it, but she really is the one that started that.
Could you tell us just a little bit about what your presidential duties entailed at first, and how do you think the president position has changed?
Well, it's not an easy job, first of all. So trying to herd cats is a good analogy. The president is a kind of part spokesperson, part manager, administrator. They are the kind of senior executive of the organization, and the president really doesn't have a lot of power per se. The FSP board really doesn't have a lot of power per se. There's an organization that kind of is the steward of the statement of intent, the participation guidelines, and the little tiny bit of finances that we have, which is shockingly smaller than anyone could probably imagine. We've been accused of having 10 or 100 times more money than we really have, and I wish we did, but we don't. So, we're entirely funded by donations from all of you, and nobody has ever given six figures to the FSP, ever in the history of the organization. So, the president is the sort of the senior executive of, making decisions on how do we allocate the money. We do have a budget that the board approves, and then the president kind of oversees making sure it's spent correctly towards outreach. This event, New Hampshire Liberty Forum, typically the president picks the people to run those, and then just tries and puts out fires. I still am also the national media representative, so I get some calls, and I field some, and I pass some off to Carla, who's now the president. And we occasionally use some other people, Chris Lawless, and a handful of others who tag team that. But it's a kind of a jack of all trades job. It helps to be a people person. And I think Bob Murphy made a funny observation on Facebook the other day. He says, it's great to see how liberty lovers in New Hampshire are handling major crime. Somebody discovered a serial killer. Did any of you read this comment? It was brilliant. And I hope I'm not stealing his thunder, but they said somebody discovered a serial killer in the and so they decided instead of throwing him in jail, they're going to have him organize next year's Porkfest. So I got to give credit to Bob for thinking of, but being the president of the FSP is a lot like that. It really is punishing. So if you want to know what it's like, just there you go.
Okay, I want to change this up a little bit, but I mean, I've been involved since day one, okay, run for city council, ran for state rep, budget committees, on and on, volunteer groups. I think both Ron Paul campaigns, and on and on and on. So, But the thing I'm most proud of, and a lot of these people here were involved in one degree or another, is when we passed, we've refused real ID here in New Hampshire. I mean, that was like a 3-year deal to get it done. But I mean, it's like to see all the folks come together, work their butts off. I guess to me, that's the thing I'm proudest of. But what I did want to mention just a little bit, rather get in, I did this, I did that crap, is like the process itself. Okay, because the thing that I thought about when I came here, I'd like to get involved, I'd like to make a change, but what the hell do I know? So what I did is every meeting, there was a meeting, I was at that meeting. Every time they asked for volunteers, I raised my hand. There's a taxpayer meeting locally. Go to the meeting, same thing, keep your mouth shut, raise your hand to volunteer. And after a period of time, you develop a network and you begin to know who the players are. And don't kid yourself, they're there. But by becoming active and becoming involved, it's amazing how quickly in New Hampshire, if you really work at it and want to do it, you can be kind of, in a way, become a player too, And that's my biggest lesson. And, in the personal, real world, these are the most wonderful people I've ever met in my life, And I feel literally blessed to be around them because they make me a better person. All of these people. I see some faces out here, too. And they're not all free staters either, Just freedom folks. That's enough for me. I got more, but that's campfire stuff.
Okay, well, I've been a stay-at-home mom, so I could homeschool my kids, and since then I've taken up gardening and chicken farming and things like that. And politically, I've done a lot. When I first came, I was involved with the New Hampshire Homeschool Coalition. I was the district area rep, so helped a lot of other families get started with homeschooling, which is always a lot of fun to pass on the knowledge and gift that you've had, because other people helped me get started, so you got to pass it on. And I served on the NHLA board for a number of years, and that was a lot of fun and a lot of work, like the bill review system. And my husband and Dave, when we were talking offline here, which I apologize for, that was rude, but nonetheless, he was reminding me that one of the first activism things that I did when I came to New Hampshire was I wanted to change the homeschool laws, because coming from Connecticut, which you would think would have horrible laws compared to New Hampshire, but in the homeschooling realm, it was the law was it was the parent's duty to educate your child. And if you sent them to public school, that was fulfilling your duty, but you were still responsible. But New Hampshire had a lot of hoops you had to jump through, curriculum had to be approved, yada, yada. And I said, what? So I worked with Don Gorman, who's been mentioned. He's our political guru, especially for those of us who came here early. He really held our hands, and he helped me. I took the law and I marked it up and said, I want to cross out all this, and deleted a bunch of stuff from the law, and he got someone to introduce it for me and help me walk it through the process, and we got it passed. So that was that was very fulfilling. It was a great step in the homeschool laws being improved here, and there's been a lot of fight since then. Almost every year something comes up. People are trying to give homeschoolers more freedom, and other people are trying to take it back away. But it's before that, people were really afraid to put anything out there, because they're always afraid of, well, if we try to change it, we might get something worse. It's like, well, you can't live your life on that premise that it could be, it could always be worse, but you got to try the fight, right? And then on a local perspective, I've pulled back into being more local because I want to be home with my gardens and my chickens and stuff. So I've run for office, but that was a little difficult because as a free stater, you get outed, and the Democrats came out with all their guns. No, they don't have guns. Their pens and their forked tongues. People I thought were my friends stabbed me in the back saying, oh, she's an evil, she's a free stater, she wants to close school, she wants to do this, she wants to do that, all this baloney. But that made it difficult to get elected state rep. But nonetheless, I've done in our town a lot of activism, and I've ended up you get to be known as a hard worker and someone who's reasonable and intelligent. And next thing you know, every time there's an opening, you say, oh, I could help with that. Well, so now I'm on the budget committee and the planning board and the recycling committee and the capital improvement advisory committee. So I have my fingers in a lot of things, and you get to help make a small difference in your town, which is where you really can make a difference. And like Brad said, there are always, especially in smaller towns, a lot of positions that go unfilled. You get your ballot, and there's no names on like 5 positions. They could be yours by getting a couple friends to write you in, and then you can get known as a hardworking, intelligent person to help change things in your town.
Okay, the question was about hats. So going back to, I mentioned I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, and as soon as I heard about the FSP, I was so in love with it and so passionate about it, so I wanted to know how I could get involved, even though I couldn't move right then. And in case you don't know, the FSP has local groups all over the country, so for those of you who haven't moved yet or are still considering moving, it's a great way to meet other liberty lovers who live where you live now, and you can promote the FSP. So I actually staged a bloodless coup of the Northern California local group and made myself the leader, because that's kind of how the FSP works. If you're willing to do something, then everyone's more than happy to have you do it. So we would go to events and have a table and hand out flyers about the FSP. And actually, I met a lot of people who live here in New Hampshire now, back in California, doing that. I met Phil here, manning an FSP table at the Libertarian Party of California convention. And so someone mentioned, I think it was Dave mentioned, how nice and normal FSP people are, and it's really true. I mean, so when you first sign up, you may feel like a freak, because you're, at least this is back before the state was even selected, so here you are promising a bunch of total strangers that you will move you don't know where for liberty. So, you're normal, but you wonder what the rest of them are like. So, the very first time that the Northern California group got together, we were all joking about we were the nicest, most clean-cut, employed, educated group of people you could imagine. I mean, total white bread. And that was at a Libertarian Party of California convention, actually. It was the first time we all got together and met in person. So then after I moved to New Hampshire, then I got involved in a lot of different ways. I should mention also that getting involved in the FSP or the Liberty Movement in general is a great way to expand your personal skill set. I am the shyest person in the world, and if you'd known me when I was younger, I mean, and anyone had said I would be on a stage in front of a bunch of people talking, you would never in a million years have believed it. But due to the FSP, I've gone on TV, I've given lectures in front of roomfuls of people. And after I moved to New Hampshire, the local group within New Hampshire, well, at the time that I moved, there were 4 local groups, and the largest one was called the Merrimack Valley Porcupines, which is centered in the most populated area of Nashua, Manchester, and Concord. And so we would have monthly meetups, and I became the leader of that group. So every month we'd get together, and back then, when there were only 100 to 200 movers in the state, it really meant a lot, those monthly get-togethers, because we would all get together and, bond. Now there are so many of us that there are get-togethers all over the state all the time, conflicting events. You have to pick and choose which ones you're going to go to. But so the MVP was a great way for me personally to get involved and to gain more confidence in public speaking, that sort of thing. Then other hats I've worn a lot. I was on the board of the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire for a couple of years, was on the board of the New Hampshire Liberty Alliance that we were talking about for a year or 2. I helped with the Real ID thing that Dave mentioned. I helped put on the first Liberty Forum, which was a lot of fun. That was the one that we had John Stossel as keynote speaker. Yeah, I used to have a blog called the Free State Observer, which... and my goal in keeping the blog was specifically to promote the FSP and to be positive. So I was sort of chronicling my own life as a former Californian who moved to New Hampshire and what's it like, and talking about the activism going on here as a way to let other people who hadn't moved yet know what was going on in state. And then another Free State early mover started Free State Blogs, which was a network of other people's blogs. So my blog got syndicated on his blog. So that was another way to promote the FSP. I'm probably forgetting a couple of things. But anyways, as far as non-FSP hats, I'm single and I work full time, so I've been working full time at the same time as all those other things I mentioned. So it is possible, and there are people, despite some of the things you may hear, there are, again, kind of normal people in the FSP with jobs and families and homes who do pay their mortgages and all of that. So it's a very, very broad tent.
Sandy, could you tell us a little bit more about the Real ID victory? Because I feel like that was very early on, relatively speaking, in the FSP history, and there were a lot fewer people here, and you guys managed to make that happen. I mean, obviously not single-handedly, but could you tell us more about that?
Sure. So for those who don't know, Real ID was a federal initiative to get sort of standardization of driver's licenses throughout the country, and there was a lot of concern about that because then some people felt it was going to be used as an internal passport, kind of like in Nazi Germany, that you not only need to show your papers coming in and out of the country, you need to show your papers within the country, which was very offensive to many people. So a few of the FSP early movers, and I don't mean to leave anyone out, but the ones I specifically remember are Joel Winters, who was also the first FSP mover to get elected to the New Hampshire State House, and as a Democrat, and Jen Coffey, who is another early mover who was elected to the State House. And she's, I think, a national director of the Second Amendment Sisters now. And Dave was involved, and several other people. So very informally, just getting together around coffee tables and in restaurants, we formulated a plan to basically stop the evil feds from making this happen in New Hampshire. And we organized a rally in Concord and it was a formal rally, and we got the necessary permits and all. So it was held right in front of the State House, had a number of excellent speakers, had banners, and it was publicized. And that played a big part in it. Another thing that played a big part was I think he's a New Hampshire native, Neil Kirk. He's a state rep. He was on board with us as being against Real ID. He gave what's now a famous speech in the New Hampshire State House against Real ID, and just on the force of his one passionate speech, changed enough minds of the New Hampshire legislators that when they actually had to vote on it, they voted it down. So, and by voting it down, I mean what they voted to not comply with the federal law within the state of New Hampshire. So it was a really big deal to us at the time. A lot of other states have done the same thing, but yeah, it was very heartening to those of us who were here early on to see that with even just such a very small group of people, we could not only make something happen, we could give the finger to the federal government. So it was really awesome.
Just kind of wanted to add to the Real ID thing. It was also probably maybe the only time that we were able to forge a broad-based coalition. I mean, the ACLU was with us. All the progressive groups in New Hampshire, they were there maybe for a different reason than we were, but we were able to put all these differing groups. We wouldn't agree with maybe anything else with them, but they, I mean, there was a real lesson, I think, to be learned there. You know what I'm saying, Seth? So I mean, that was, the crazy stuff about all this stuff. Everything is always a learning experience, and it never stops.
Well, and actually, that's a great piece to bring up because Don mentioned the homeschooling reform. So we deregulated parts of the homeschooling law. And the sponsor of that bill, the actual sponsor, was a friend of Don Gorman's. We've mentioned Don Gorman a bunch of times. Don Gorman, I will tell you right now, in my mind, is the unofficial godfather of the FSP. We would not be here today celebrating all the victories we've had without his influence. So he's awesome. The original sponsor of the homeschooling bill is a man named Lee Kwan, who's a friend of Don Gorman's, and yet, a scan 8 years later, we've got some reps who are going ahead and ranting about, those FSPers, they're blah blah blah, and Lee Kwan's one of them. The point I'm making is that politics is a very strange thing. There are times you can get up there and be completely in agreement with somebody. You are totally on opposite sides on lots of other things. And so there is a huge process of learning how to get things done. I was lucky enough, we had a bunch of people who run for state rep. I was lucky enough to actually get elected. I spent 2 years at the New Hampshire State House. I got quite a lot done. We were part of a huge landslide Republican victory. And a lot of the Republican freshmen who were elected were liberty-leaning. And we were business people. We were people who basically had said, I'm going to get involved in politics. Yes, I'm making a sacrifice. Yes, I'm going to take a job that only pays $100 a year and have to show up between January and June in New Hampshire to this big building in Concord and basically argue with all the people who want to run our lives, and we're going to try to say no. And we were extremely successful. We initiated the largest cut in state budgets that anybody had seen in a long time. We cut $1 billion from the state budget in 2011, 2012. And it's huge, huge. And of course, you know, the opposition said there'll be blood in the streets, there'll be dead bodies everywhere, and it didn't happen. I had a lot of interesting irons in the fire. The feather in my cap is I got a bill passed that does open source and open data so that at this point, any request for proposal that the state of New Hampshire issues regarding software and systems and all the various things that they do, it now says that open source is preferred and that open data is fairly required unless there's a good reason. I don't know if we're taking questions yet. But the point being is that it is possible to get things done and see those happen. Another thing that happened, we had, as I said, a Republican sweep, and suddenly the conservative Republicans said, great, we can get rid of that gay marriage law that the Democrats passed. And so, of course, they forgot that it was the libertarians that helped make up their majority. And so they put in a bill to repeal same-sex marriage. And I said, if you can take away their rights, well, we might as well just go ahead and say 2 left-handed people can't get married. That made national news because some people realized I was making fun of them and got very upset. That's the other thing, is you have to have fun. It doesn't matter what job you take, and I've done budget and planning board and recycling committee and all of those things, and you take those because it's about being a good neighbor. But at the end of the day, you have to be doing it because you're enjoying it, because if you don't, you get grumpy. And that is probably the biggest thing I would say all of us have seen over the lifetime of the FSP is it used to be just a bunch of us. And it was like, we'd like to do that, but, you know, we're all swamped. And it was great because then more people would show up and they go, I have an idea. We go, good, go do it. Go do it. So we now have enough people that I'm seeing all these great things that years ago were pipe dreams that we were like, oh, maybe one day. And it happens now. I mean, this is awesome. But you know what? I mean, we were talking, the original the building that burned down, you could fit everybody who showed up for Porcfest in that building. You couldn't do that now. That's huge. So we remember the old days. You know, we walked uphill both ways for Liberty, and it was snowing. And we were barefoot. That's right. Yeah, exactly.
We have about 10 minutes left in the hour for questions, so we're going to open that up right now. Please come up here. There's another mic. Oh, there's a mic right there. So get in line and ask your question. You can address it. Please, if you can, address it to one person or a couple people specifically. And if you don't have anything new to say, don't say anything at all.
This one
I
is
love
either
you
for
guys.
Dawn, Varen, or Bradley. Can you tell a little more about what it was like to move here with kids?
All right, I'll keep it very short. When we moved, we had basically a 6-year-old, a 4-year-old, and 2 2-year-olds, and we moved ourselves from Minnesota. We were fortunate. My father came out, so he drove one truck. We drove a van towing a car. 3-day trip across the half the U.S. in the end of January, early February, which is the perfect time to move to New Hampshire. Fortunately, we didn't get caught in any blizzards, but when we got here, there was about 2 feet of snow on the ground. But like I said, we had a 26-foot box truck which was packed as much as it possibly could, and it unloaded in 45 minutes. It was amazing. So they make great stories, whatever happens. It worked out fantastic for us, and we've never looked back. So.
That's something I'd like to add for anybody who hasn't heard yet. Don't worry about moving in. There's every time, as long as you let people know what day you're coming and where you're going to be, you will get a crowd of people, and your van or vehicles or whatever will be unloaded, really rather fast. Of course.
So to Kate's question, well, I moved here. My daughters were 8 and 10. We moved from Connecticut. We were going to be about under 2 hours from where they grew up, but they were very reluctant to move. Most kids don't like change. I don't want to go. Now they're here. They wouldn't want to move again. So they adjusted. It's a time thing for some kids to adjust to a new place, and you just have to get involved in the community. And once they were and felt invested in that they knew kids and had things to do, then they were fine.
You reminded me of something that's important. The reason we move is not a job. Now, just think about this. A lot of people move for jobs. I mentioned earlier the Monadnock Aviation people, and they have a couple of kids, and I happened to ask one of them, they moved up from Florida 5 years ago. They're not Free Staters. And she said, well, at first I hated it, but now I like it. People move, people with kids move, kids get over it. And if ever your kids say, why did we move? At the very least, instead of saying I was chasing a paycheck, you can say I went to try to make the world a freer place. And I think that's a very good answer.
All right, I guess this is for Dawn. In the realm of schooling, talking specifically, is there anything going on as far as like school choice? I mean, that's one of the big things that I've been thinking about. I live in Kansas, and we don't have horrible property taxes, but if I want to homeschool or anything, it's like I'm paying twice, you know what I mean? So.
Yeah, we all pay twice, and that kind of sucks, but that's the way the game is rigged at this point. School choice, there's an organization that a bill got passed where they can, businesses can donate money to, what's Kate's NEO? That they can give out scholarships to students to go to private schools. And Jody Underwood was just in here saying Croydon, they passed school choice in the town. So towns, and I'm thinking, boy, I want to put that in as a warrant article in my school district next year, is to say, let the money follow the child. They want to go to the private school, let them go. So there's not a ton, but homeschooling is not that expensive. Private schooling can be, but there are scholarships and different things like that. So, you just have to look, be creative, and there are options to make it work.
Okay.
Hi. I don't know exactly who to address this to, but I guess, so there's a couple other choices for the Free State Project, 2 through 10 or whatever it may be. And some people, may have gravitated towards those places anyway. How do you feel about those people that, can't exactly make the move to here where the movement is centralized and have gone to these other locations and maybe have like a decentralized approach to liberty?
So I'll start with that one, because I'll tell you right now, the fact that New Hampshire was picked was, for me, one of the reasons that I'm here. Because there are certain other states that if they had picked, which were contenders, I would not have moved. I had driven through those states, and I knew I didn't want to live there, and I would have just continued looking elsewhere. So looking back with hindsight now, one of the reasons that we've been extremely successful in New Hampshire is how small the state is. You can drive from one end of the state to the other. The early days, we lived all over the state. We didn't live in one place. And so we were driving from one end of the state to the other on a regular basis because we'd go, well, Dave's holding a Seacoast meeting and I don't live at the Seacoast, but I'm going to go show up and I'm going to go meet some new people. If we had picked Wyoming or one of these very wide places, there's no way that would have been happening. It would have been a very different sort of environment. We built community because of how small the state was. And so the problem with the decentralized thing, and it's really true everywhere, there are lots of places where there's libertarians, and they go ahead and they have a meeting, and 5 people show up, and they go, wow, we really are alone. That doesn't happen here. What happens here is you have a meeting, and 50 people show up, and it's got a mix of genders, and it's got a mix of ages, and you're mostly in agreement on things. You may disagree on, but you're starting from a spot where you're not feeling alone, and more so, it's not the only 50 people you know. It's like there's another 150 that just didn't happen to make that meeting. That's huge. That makes the difference. And the problem with all the other little things, and I respect the fact that there are people who can't move because they have family commitments, but it's swimming against the tide. And what we're trying to do here is build up the numbers that we are pushing back. Are we successful? No, not all the time. We've had losses, absolutely. We've also had victories. And I think our victories continue to outnumber our losses. This last election swing, with a Republican swing, we had a dozen Free Staters in the House. And they screamed bloody murder on the Democrat side, and they said, oh, those crazy Free Staters, you got to vote them out. You got to vote out those Tea Partiers. We need to restore sanity to the state of New Hampshire. And so this state, as part of the last election cycle, went blue again. And the Republicans lost control of the House, and it went back to the Democrats. And you know how many Free Staters we elected? 11. We didn't swing.
Okay, if I might try to address your question in specifics, okay? I think one thing you got to remember about us, okay, when you start the thing, we came to New Hampshire to make it our home, first and above everything else, okay? And, part of that is get involved in freedom stuff, okay? We are so committed to New Hampshire and trying to save freedom here that, quite frankly, we wish you well, but that's all we can do. We got to do our own house, and I don't mean that disrespectfully, but I mean we got way more than it's not like freedom's winning all the time, duh. So I guess that would be my answer to that.
Very briefly, but
It'll be real brief.
Okay.
There is one thing you can do, and that is when you see a good idea that we do here, we don't have a monopoly. We're not monopolists. Take it home and do it there if you can, if you have the manpower. And, hopefully we will prototype things that everybody else can copy.
Can I have one last question
Yeah,
for Bradley?
really quick.
My husband. This is the one time I get to take the mic from him. Where do you see the FSP in the next 10 years, and where in the world are we going to host the PorcFest 20? If there's 1,250 of us registered here now this week, and probably closer to 1,300 total, where are we going to go? Where are we going to be? What is it going to be like? Thank you.
Well, Rogers has to expand. And actually, I was thinking about that on the way down here. There's been a good amount of talk about what's going on at the State House because from a day-to-day perspective, it does have an impact on our lives. You think about officially 1,200 movers or so far and look at the impact they've had. Okay, let's go 10 times that. Get 12,000 people here. Get 10 times the number of people in office. You're talking about, 100 people at the State House? Out of a total of 400, you've got 25% of the votes. That's enough to swing every piece of legislation that's controversial in the direction of liberty. Then combine that with all the other activism that's going on, whether it's homeschoolers, whether it's the people in Keene who are harassing the cops, which I know some people here don't like, but I kind of find it humorous at times. Multiply all of it by 10. Multiply the books, the music, the people doing charity work, and it would be huge. And it's not impossible.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, we have to get going, but everybody will be, outside the tent. So thank you so much for everything you've done.